Halloween night in St. Genevieve, Missouri, 2015, carried a weight that felt older than the holiday itself. The town wore its French colonial past like a second skin. Limestone houses with steep roofs, narrow streets lit by antique-style lamps, and the faint echo of history in every cobblestone. Maggie and I had spent the evening on our porch, handing out candy to children in costumes. Pirates, witches, superheroes, and ghosts darted between the houses, their laughter bouncing off the stone walls. The jack-o'-lanterns we had carved earlier flickered in the cool night air, their crooked grins glowing against the dark. By 11, the streets had grown quiet. The last of the trick-or-treaters had gone home, and the town seemed to fold into itself, as though the night had claimed it. Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and pumpkin spice. Maggie had insisted on baking earlier, and the warmth of it lingered, comforting against the chill that seeped through the old windows. We curled up on the couch, the glow of the television painting the room in restless shadows. Maggie leaned against me, her hair brushing my shoulder, her eyes half closed as a muted horror movie played in the background. "You're restless," she murmured. "Am I? You keep looking at the door, like you're waiting for something." I laughed softly, though she wasn't wrong. There was a tension in the air I couldn't name, a sense that the night wasn't finished with us yet. Maybe it was the way the wind rattled the shutters, or the way the silence outside seemed too complete. The old clock on the mantel ticked steadily, each second louder than the last. When the hands reached midnight, the chimes began to echo through the house. And then came the knock. 3 sharp raps against the front door. Maggie and I both froze. It wasn't unusual for someone to knock, of course. But at midnight, on Halloween, in a town that had gone utterly still, it felt wrong. "Probably some late-night kids," Maggie whispered, though her voice carried no conviction. I stood slowly, my heart thudding in my chest. The knocks hadn't been playful or hesitant. They had been deliberate, heavy, as though whoever stood outside knew exactly what they were doing. Maggie followed me to the door, her hand brushing mine as if to steady herself. Together, we reached the threshold. I hesitated, hand on the knob. "Ready?" She nodded. I pulled the door open. The porch was empty. The street beyond lay silent, the houses dark, the jack-o'-lanterns guttering low. No children, no pranksters, no one at all. Just the cold night air rushing in, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and damp leaves. And then I saw it. On the welcome mat, directly in front of the threshold, lay a small object. I bent down and picked it up. It was a key. Old, heavy iron. The kind you'd expect to find in a centuries-old lock, not in a modern suburban neighborhood. Its surface was worn smooth, but there was something unsettling about it, something that tugged at the edges of memory. Maggie leaned closer, her brow furrowed. "Where did that come from?" "It wasn't here earlier," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and uncertain. She frowned. "Maybe when the kids dropped it." No kid carries a key like this. We stood there for a long moment, the night pressing in around us. The key felt cold in my hand, heavier than it should have been. I turned it over, searching for markings, but there were none. Just the simple, unyielding shape of iron. Maggie shivered and wrapped her arms around herself. "Let's go inside." I closed the door and locked it, though the act felt futile. The key remained in my hand, its weight impossible to ignore. Back in the living room, we sat together on the couch, the object resting on the coffee table between us. The movie still played on the television, but neither of us paid it any attention. "Do you recognize it?" Maggie asked. I shook my head. "No, but it feels familiar, like I've seen it before." She gave me a skeptical look. "Maybe you're just spooking yourself. It's Halloween. People do weird things, like leaving antique keys on strangers' porches." She didn't answer. The clock ticked on. The house seemed to grow colder, though the thermostat read the same. I couldn't stop staring at the key, its dark shape stark against the wood of the table. Finally, Maggie reached out and picked it up. She turned it over in her hand, her brow furrowed. "It's heavier than it looks," she murmured. "I told you." She set it back down quickly, as though it had burned her. We didn't speak much after that. The silence stretched, thick and uneasy. Eventually, Maggie leaned against me again, her head on my shoulder, but I could feel the tension in her body. Neither of us was truly at ease. At some point, I must have dozed off. When I woke, the television was dark, the house silent. Maggie was asleep beside me, her breathing slow and steady. The key was gone. I sat up, heart pounding, scanning the room. The coffee table was empty. I checked the floor, the couch cushions, even my pockets. Nothing. I didn't wake Maggie. I didn't want to see the look on her face if I told her. Instead, I sat there in the dark, listening to the silence, waiting for the sound of another knock. Morning light in St. Genevieve has a way of softening everything, even the sharp edges of fear. The sun spilled across the limestone walls of our street, warming the rooftops, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself that the night before had been nothing more than a dream. Almost. The coffee pot gurgled in the kitchen, and Maggie moved about with her usual calm efficiency, humming under her breath. I sat at the table, staring at the empty spot where the key should have been. "You're quiet," she said, setting a mug in front of me. I wrapped my hands around it, though I barely tasted the coffee. "The key's gone." She gave me a look, half amusement, half concern. "You mean the one from last night? Maybe you misplaced it." "I didn't misplace it. It was on the table. Right there." I tapped the wood, and when I woke up, it was gone. Maggie sipped her coffee, her eyes steady on mine. "Maybe you dreamed that part. You were half asleep." Her tone was gentle, but the implication stung. I wanted to argue, to insist that I knew what I had seen, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I nodded, though uneasily. The day passed in a haze. I tried to distract myself with errands, with the rhythm of ordinary life, but the thought of the vanished key gnawed at me. Every creak of the house, every flicker of shadow seemed to carry weight. At one point, while folding laundry, I thought I heard footsteps upstairs. When I checked, the rooms were empty. Maggie noticed my distraction. "You're letting this get to you," she said that evening as we prepared dinner. "It was probably just some kid playing a prank. Old towns like this are full of stories. People like to keep them alive by leaving antique keys on porches." She smiled faintly, but her eyes betrayed unease. "Stranger things have happened here." We ate in silence after that. By the time night fell again, I felt a tension building in my chest, a certainty that the knocking would return. Maggie must have sensed it too, because she suggested we stay up together. "If it happens again," she said, "we'll both see it. Then we'll know." So we sat in the living room, the lights dimmed, the clock ticking toward midnight. The house seemed to hold its breath. When the chimes began, I felt Maggie's hand tighten around mine. And then, as if on cue, the sound came. 3 sharp raps against the front door. We both froze. "You heard that?" I whispered. Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "Yes." We rose together, moving slowly, as though any sudden motion might shatter the fragile reality around us. At the door, I hesitated again, hand on the knob. Maggie nodded, and I pulled it open. The porch was empty, but on the welcome mat lay another object. This time, it wasn't a key. It was a small silver locket, tarnished with age. Maggie gasped and reached for it before I could stop her. She turned it over in her hand, her fingers trembling. "I know this," she whispered. "What do you mean?" "It's mine. I lost it when I was a kid. My grandmother gave it to me. I thought it was gone forever." She opened it, and inside was the tiny photograph she remembered. Her grandmother's face, faded but unmistakable. I stared at her, my mouth dry. "How could it be here?" She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know." We brought it inside, placing it on the table where the key had been the night before. The air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. "This isn't a prank," I said. "No one can know about this. No one could find it." Maggie looked at me, her expression torn between fear and suspicion. "Unless you had it all along." The words hit me like a blow. "What? You think I planted this?" "I don't know what to think," she said, her voice rising. "First the key, now this. Both times you're the one who notices. How do I know you're not?" "Not what?" She fell silent, but the distance between us was palpable. We sat in uneasy quiet, the locket gleaming faintly in the lamplight. The clock ticked on, each second stretching longer than the last. Then, faintly from outside, came the sound of footsteps. Maggie's head snapped up. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my pulse racing. We moved to the window, peering out into the street. The cobblestones glistened under the lamplight, but the street was empty. Still, the sound persisted, measured, deliberate steps, fading into the distance. We opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The night air was cold, the silence oppressive. The footsteps had stopped. The street lay deserted, the houses dark, the jack-o'-lanterns now nothing but hollow shells. Maggie clutched my arm. "Someone's out there." I swallowed hard, scanning the shadows. Or something. We stood there for a long moment, the weight of the night pressing down on us, until finally we retreated inside. Back in the living room, the locket sat on the table, gleaming faintly as though it had been waiting for us. Neither of us spoke. The doubt had taken root. The morning after the locket, the house felt different. Not haunted, exactly, but unsettled, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Maggie and I moved around each other in silence, careful, deliberate, as if any sudden word might shatter the fragile truce between us. She wore the locket around her neck now, the tarnished silver resting against her collarbone. She touched it often, almost unconsciously, as though reassuring herself it was real. I couldn't stop staring at it. The way it gleamed in the morning light made me uneasy, as though it didn't belong in this world anymore. "You're staring," she said finally, her voice flat. "I'm trying to understand," I replied. "There's nothing to understand. It's mine. I lost it years ago. Now it's back. That doesn't make sense, Maggie. Things don't just appear on doorsteps after decades." She looked at me sharply. "Unless someone put it there." The implication hung in the air. I didn't answer. That evening, the tension only grew. We ate dinner in silence, the clink of silverware loud in the quiet house. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, and the old clock ticked steadily toward midnight. Finally, Maggie set her fork down. "We're not going to sleep through it this time. We'll stay up, together. If it happens again, we'll both see it." I nodded. Agreed. We made coffee, turned off the television, and sat in the living room with only a single lamp burning. The house seemed to shrink around us, the shadows pressing closer. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind felt amplified. By the time the clock neared midnight, my nerves were raw. Maggie sat beside me, her hand resting on the locket, her eyes fixed on the door. When the chimes began, the sound seemed to reverberate through my bones. And then, right on cue, came the knock. 3 sharp raps. We both stood. This time, there was no hesitation. We moved together, side by side, and I pulled the door open. The porch was empty, but on the welcome mat lay another object. I bent down, my breath catching. It was a small leather-bound book, old and cracked, its pages yellowed with age. I picked it up, the musty smell of paper and dust rising from it. But Maggie gasped. "That's not what I see," she whispered. I turned to her. "What are you talking about?" "It's a book." Her face was pale, her eyes wide. "No, it's a doll, a porcelain doll. I used to have one just like it when I was little." I stared at her, then back at the object in my hands. It was clearly a book, heavy, solid, real. I opened it, flipping through brittle pages filled with faded handwriting. "There's no doll here, Maggie. Look." I held it out to her. She recoiled. "Don't play games with me. I can see it. It's right there." We stood frozen, staring at each other, each convinced of what we saw. "It's a book," I insisted. "It's a doll," she shot back. The air between us crackled with tension. The object, whatever it was, sat on the threshold, mocking us both. Finally, I set it down on the table inside. "Fine. You see what you see. I see what I see. But we can't both be right." Maggie's voice trembled. "Then which one of us is losing our mind?" The argument that followed was sharp, bitter, and unlike anything we had ever had before. "You think I'm making this up?" I demanded. "I think you're hiding something," she snapped. "First the key, then the locket, now this. Always you're the one who notices first. Always you're the one who touches it. You think I planted these things? Why would I do that?" "I don't know." Her voice cracked. "But how else do you explain it?" I had no answer. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. Then came a sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing against the cobblestones outside. Maggie's eyes met mine, wide with fear. Together, we moved to the window, peering out into the street. The lamplight glistened on the stones, but the street was empty. Still, the sound persisted, measured steps drawing closer. They stopped directly in front of our door. We held our breath. The silence that followed was suffocating. I reached for the knob, but Maggie grabbed my hand. "Don't," she whispered. But I did. I pulled the door open. The porch was empty. The street was silent. And yet, the air inside the house felt different. Heavier, colder, as though something had crossed the threshold with us. Maggie clutched the locket, her knuckles white. "It's here," she whispered. I didn't answer, because I felt it too. By the 4th night, the house no longer felt like ours. Every corner seemed to hold its breath. Every shadow stretched too long. Maggie and I barely spoke during the day. Our words clipped, our silences heavy. The locket still hung around her neck, a constant reminder of what had been left for us. We both knew the knocks would come again. When the clock neared midnight, we sat together in the living room, the lamp casting a weak circle of light. The air was cold, though the heater hummed steadily. Maggie's hand rested on the arm of the couch, her fingers twitching nervously. The chimes began, and then, as always, 3 sharp raps against the door. We rose together, moving slowly, as though drawn by something we couldn't resist. I opened the door. The porch was empty, but on the welcome mat sat a doll. It was small, no more than a foot tall, dressed in a tattered black robe. Its head was a hollowed pumpkin, crudely painted with a jagged grin. Two glass eyes gleamed from within the carved sockets, catching the lamplight in a way that made them seem alive. The fabric of its clothes was frayed, stained with something dark. Maggie gasped. "Oh my God!" I bent down, hesitant, and picked it up. The doll was heavier than it looked, its body stiff, as though something solid lay beneath the cloth. The pumpkin head smelled faintly of rot, though it was clearly artificial. "Why a doll?" I muttered. Maggie's face had gone pale. "I had one like this when I was a kid. My mom bought it for me one Halloween. I hated it. I thought it watched me while I slept." I stared at her. "You're saying this is the same one?" She shook her head quickly. "No, it can't be. We threw it away years ago, but it looks exactly the same." We brought it inside, setting it on the table. The doll sat upright, its glass eyes fixed on us. The grin carved into its pumpkin face seemed wider now, though I told myself it was just the angle of the light. "This is a threat," I said. "Someone is targeting us. First the key, then the locket, now this. They know things about us. Things they shouldn't." Maggie wrapped her arms around herself. "But who? Who would do this?" I had no answer. We sat in silence, staring at the doll. The longer I looked, the more wrong it seemed. Its head tilted slightly to one side, as though listening. Its hands, stitched from cloth, were clenched into tiny fists. Finally, Maggie stood. "I don't want it in here." She grabbed the doll and carried it to the door. I followed, watching as she set it back on the porch. She closed the door firmly, locking it. But when we turned back toward the living room, the air felt heavier, colder. We sat again, tried to ignore the weight of what had just happened. But neither of us could relax. Every creak of the house made us flinch. Then came the sound, a faint scrape like fabric dragging across wood. Maggie's eyes widened. "It's inside." I shook my head. "No, you put it outside." But the sound came again, closer this time. We rose together, moving cautiously toward the hallway. The scrape echoed once more, followed by a soft thud. When we turned the corner, the doll was there. It sat upright in the middle of the hallway floor, its glass eyes gleaming in the dim light. Maggie let out a strangled cry. "I put it outside. I swear I did." I felt my stomach drop. "I know. We didn't touch it this time." We backed away slowly, returning to the living room. The doll remained where it was, silent, watching. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear. We didn't sleep. We didn't speak. We just sat together, waiting while the doll sat in the hallway, its grin fixed, its eyes unblinking. By dawn, it was gone. The hallway was empty, the floor bare. Maggie clutched the locket around her neck, her hands trembling. "It's not going to stop," she whispered. I couldn't argue, because I knew she was right. By the fifth night, the house had become unbearable. The walls seemed to lean inward, the air heavy with silence. Maggie and I no longer spoke except in whispers, as though raising our voices might summon the thing that had been haunting us. The doll's grin lingered in every corner of my mind, even when it wasn't in sight. At dawn, after another sleepless night, Maggie broke the silence. "We can't stay here," she said. Her voice was raw, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. I nodded. "We'll leave. Today." We didn't pack carefully. We didn't even try. We stuffed clothes into suitcases, shoved dishes into boxes, left furniture behind. The only thing we wanted was distance. Distance from the house, from the knocks, from the doll. When we carried the last box to the car, the doll was waiting. It sat in the hallway, just inside the door, its pumpkin head tilted, its glass eyes gleaming in the dim light. Maggie froze, trembling. "Leave it," I whispered. "Just leave it." We closed the door, locked it, and didn't look back. The drive out of St. Genevieve was silent. The limestone houses and narrow streets passed by like a fading dream. The Mississippi shimmered in the distance, and the autumn fields stretched endlessly beyond. Maggie stared out the window, her hands clenched in her lap. I kept my eyes on the road, afraid that if I looked in the rearview mirror, I might see the doll sitting in the back seat. Hours later, we arrived at the new house, a modest rental in a newer neighborhood, far from the old stones and shadows of St. Genevieve. The walls were clean, the floors polished, the air bright with the smell of fresh paint. It felt safe. It felt ordinary. For the first time in days, we breathed. We spent the evening unpacking, stacking boxes in the living room, trying to convince ourselves that the nightmare was behind us. Maggie even laughed once, a small, brittle sound, but it was laughter all the same. By midnight, we were exhausted. We sat together on the couch, surrounded by half-open boxes, sipping lukewarm coffee. The silence of a new house was different, lighter, less oppressive. And then came the sound. 3 sharp raps against the door. We froze. "No," Maggie whispered. "No, it can't." The knocks came again, louder this time. I stood, my legs trembling, and walked to the door. Maggie followed, clutching my arm. Together, we opened it. The street outside was empty. The night air was still. But on the welcome mat sat the doll. Its pumpkin grin gleamed in the porch light, its glass eyes fixed on us. Maggie let out a strangled sob. We left it. We left it there. I couldn't speak. My throat had closed. We carried it inside without meaning to, as though compelled. It sat on the floor among the boxes, its head tilted, its grin wider than ever. We stared at it, paralyzed. "It's not the house," I whispered finally. "It's us." Maggie shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "It will never stop." The doll sat in silence, watching. And in that moment, I knew she was right. Subscribe for more videos.